So I just had a series of thoughts coalesce. This is a product of several years of contemplating something that kind of is unimaginable. In 2019, the New York Times put out a podcast, The Daily, an episode on education, in which they analyzed what had happened over the past 2 decades.
Today, for decades, the U.S. has spent billions of dollars trying to close its education gap with the rest of the world. New data shows that all that money made no difference. Dana Goldstein on how that could be.
So they looked at how much money had been spent and how much progress, how much benefit had been achieved. And the conclusion was that they had spent $20 billion on educational policy, attempts to improve education and educational outcomes. And the results had been zero progress. $20 billion with literally nothing to show for it. I've been wondering and thinking about and pondering this question in the back of my mind, sometimes more actively, sometimes more subconsciously. Why? Now, that money was spent mostly in programs like No Child Left Behind and Obama's update to No Child Left Behind called Race to the Top.
Ever since George W. Bush was elected and No Child Left Behind, through President Obama and Race to the Top and Common Core and effort after effort to try to get American kids to do better on these types of international exams, American performance has not changed. It's stagnant.
Despite not just all those programs, but I presume the billions of dollars spent to put them in place.
Many, many billions of dollars. Private dollars, public dollars, all of that.
One could argue that those policies were just so flawed that that's the problem. And I definitely, as an educator, was against high stakes testing. I heard a lot of teachers complaining about it for good reason. So I think some of the blame lies there. But there's something deeper and more fundamental going on here. And I think I finally figured out what it is. The simple truth is that dysregulated children can't learn. Dysregulated people cannot learn. Now, that's obvious to anyone who's worked with kids. But what's not obvious is how fundamentally impactful this truth, this obvious truth, is in terms of our current educational crisis, I would call it. Just think of the rates of ADHD. Think of the increase in the number of kids being diagnosed with ADHD. Well, one simple way to think about what ADHD is dysregulation. They can't sit still. They're not able to calmly focus. They're not comfortable in their own skin in a sense. They're jumping out of their skin. They're jumping out of their seats. They're not regulated sufficiently. Now think of the increases in anxiety, rates of anxiety. Anxiety could be described as a form of just dysregulation. And the rates are skyrocketing. We know this. So what if the root of all this ADHD and all this anxiety and who knows what other symptoms or maladies, those are just the two huge categories that off the top of my head that I think represent this or are examples of this. Our kids and maybe our whole country is dysregulated. I mean, we're living in what many people call an outrage culture. That's dysregulation. People get paid to be dysregulated, to display dysregulation, and to cause dysregulation. And if you think about how rampant this is, and then you pull it back and you think about these kids in the classroom, and you think about a teacher standing in front of a classroom of 25 kids, whether those are first graders or seventh graders or 11th graders, and you think about how much dysregulation is in the room. How is that teacher supposed to communicate anything? You don't need 95% of the kids to be dysregulated either. Sometimes you only need one to torpedo the whole class. If you have one highly dysregulated kid who's acting out, you can't just ignore that and go on. You have to stop and address it. So let's say out of the 25 kids in an average classroom, you have 5 kids that are actively dysregulated. That's 20%. That's an impossible situation. You have to be an absolute master educator to even have a chance in that situation. So what are the implications of this? If this is true, if this is even partially true, the solution is sort of obvious, that the antidote to dysregulation is supporting more regulation. I mean, just logically. Now, part of what helped this set of ideas click is that I've been thinking more about the rise, or the rapid rise, the explosion in interest in executive functioning support. And executive functioning, if you look into the literature, it's almost synonymous with self-regulation. And so when you see kids struggling with executive function, we usually see it from the outside in. So we're thinking, this kid needs to learn how to plan better. This kid needs to learn how to be more organized, how to break down big tasks into smaller ones. But a more fundamental aspect of being able to do all those things is just the simple phenomenon, not easy, but fundamental phenomenon of self-regulation. So if kids are dysregulated, they're not going to be able to enact these executive skills, pure and simple. You can't tell someone who's unable to self-regulate just to self-regulate, which is in effect what we're doing when we're trying to teach someone who doesn't have executive skills how to be more organized. Because we're seeing it as a lack of technique rather than a lack of capacity. You can teach someone the best technique in the gym, but if they don't have the muscles, the fundamental strength to lift a certain amount of weight, they're just not going to be able to do it. It's not a matter of technique at that point. Technique only goes so far. It's helpful. I'm not opposed to technique. And it can make a lot of difference in some cases. But there's no amount of technique that's going to make up for a lack of fundamental capacity. So this sort of begs the question, how do you cultivate, how do you support, how do you help students, kids, people who are dysregulated achieve a state of regulation and ultimately self-regulation? This is a big question, and there's a few different ideas that I want to try to touch upon here just to get this ball rolling, this conversation started. First, we have to distinguish between two kind of types of dysregulation, and one is momentary, situational, acute. So we have something happen in one's day that throws someone out of balance, and then they're dysregulated. That type of dysregulation is a problem, but usually will fix itself within a few hours, or at least a day or two. And then there's so that's acute. And then there's more chronic dysregulation where somebody's default way of moving through life is dysregulated. That's obviously a deeper, more difficult situation. But we actually need to be able to address both. A sort of acute example, common example of dysregulation is test anxiety. It's not chronic anxiety. It's very specific. There's a very clear catalyst. So helping a student who is normally fairly even-keeled or reasonably well regulated, who gets thrown off because they're sensitive or because they're, they have a sort of mindset that, where they're striving for perfection or they're worried about failure or whatever. Helping that student deal with that temporary dysregulation is really helpful in terms of helping them have peace of mind, helping them perform at a level commensurate with their actual ability. I was just working with a student last night who's so smart and so thoughtful. And she was performing several levels below her ability because She was getting dysregulated because she's so sensitive, which is such a beautiful quality. But if you don't have the tools and the knowledge and the know-how to deal with your own temperament, then you're just going to get thrown off center, thrown off balance time and time and time and time again, and you're going to feel terrible. It's going to be so frustrating because you'll know somewhere deep inside that your performance doesn't match your ability. And then over an even longer period of time, you start to go, well, I guess that's just my ability. And you start to get this skewed self-image, this degraded, skewed self-image. And it's heartbreaking to see. But with that situation, you have someone who, once they get those tools and start understanding what's going on, what's happening, why they're getting temporarily dysregulated, that problem is handled. But when you have someone who's chronically dysregulated, who's just sort of stuck in a imbalanced mode of being, that's a tough one. It takes a lot longer to help that person learn. It's not even a learning process to become more balanced, because from everything I've learned over the past 15 years plus of studying human development, child development, humans learn self-regulation from the outside in. It's not a skill that you just tell someone how to do it and then they do it. It's something that they learn from, it's something that they absorb from others, from adults, usually from people to whom they're attached, to whom they look up to whom they follow, to whom they feel cared for by. If you walk into a room and there's a spiritual master meditating, that person radiates peace. And guess what? You feel it. And guess what? Your nervous system responds to that by getting calm itself. It's built into us. This is what they talk about when they say we have mirror neurons. Our neurons see things and mirror them. We watch someone crying in a movie and we feel sad. We watch someone laughing. We might not know why they're laughing. And if they're laughing hard enough, we'll start laughing. We have mirror neurons. So when a child sees someone and feels someone at peace, when anyone sees someone or feels someone at peace, they feel at peace. And if you give someone the experience of inner peace or inner balance enough, it entrains them. It gives them an intuitive, implicit understanding of how to perpetuate that sense of balance and inner calm or peace. That's self-regulation. Self-regulation is the result of sufficient care. Now, I want to make a distinction here because the word care has two meanings. Care can mean how much you feel, how much you love someone, how much you care about them, but it also has an active meaning. It's the care that you provide. It's how you treat someone. It's how you care for them. I do not doubt for a second that a vast majority of parents and teachers and child care workers care about their kids and students and children that they're responsible for. I do not doubt that for a second. We have a very caring population, a very caring country. But if you do not know how human development works, if you have a model of human development that is incorrect through no fault of your own, the actions you will take can backfire. They can be ineffective in the same way that my student, who's so smart and thoughtful, was performing at a much lower level because something was getting in the way. We can care so much that we take action that leads to dysregulation. For example, we can care so much that we're going to make sure we are there night and day helping our child stay on track, whatever that means. It's going to vary depending on the age of the child and the circumstances, but we can just be there. And guess what? It's coming from a place of caring. And to some extent, the child knows that, so it's not all bad. But if you don't understand that autonomy, the sense that you are able to live a life free from coercion and control, external control, if we don't understand that that is a foundational psychological need, a fundamental psychological need, then we can be thwarting that sense of autonomy because we care. We care, but we have an incorrect map of reality, an incorrect map of human nature, of human development. It's like if you're trying to get from point A to point B, and the faster you run or the faster you drive, you think the sooner you'll arrive. Except if you're going in the wrong direction, you'll never arrive. So it's not that we don't care. It's that we don't know how to care properly for kids. Some fundamental knowledge has been lost. And if you don't believe me, then please try to explain why we have an epidemic of dysregulation. Why? you can't just blame it on social media. Social media correlates with spikes in both anxiety and depression, and I'm sure doesn't help. But it's hard to say whether anxious and depressed kids fall prey to social media or if social media causes healthy, normal, balanced kids to become anxious and depressed. It's probably a bit of both. This is the nature nurture problem. It's it's an impossible calculation to ever arrive at. So we have to hold that question with some humility and some looseness, some open-mindedness, and assume that both are factors, and we just don't know if it's 50-50 or 60-40 or 70-30. And if it is 70-30 or 60-40, which is which? But even if it's social media causing the problem 60% of the time, and the way that we are raising children is 40% of the problem, that's a huge factor. Huge. Even if it's 30%, it's a huge factor in sheer numeric terms, but it's also huge because we have more control over that side of the equation. We can limit kids' times externally, limit how much exposure to social media or try. And that's part of the 30% or the 50% or the 70%. It might be that way. So this is a huge problem. And I don't want to oversimplify things and just blame parents or early childhood educators. I'm not interested in blame at all. I'm interested in understanding what's going on so that we can collectively do better together. I want everyone to be it's not helping parents. Parents are suffering when they care, obviously, deeply. They love their kids more than anyone. And if they have the wrong model, at the very least, they're going to be frustrated because their results are not going to be what they're hoping for. They're not going to be as effective with their own kids as they want to be. That's frustrating. It can be maddening. I'm a parent, I know, and it's not easy. And I'm not offering some magic bullet, but I think we have some assumptions that are so wildly off that correcting those would be helpful. One of those is the idea of self-esteem. How does self-esteem function? How important is it? How do we cultivate it? This is a topic for an entire video in and of itself, but just to touch upon it, we sort of have this collective belief that one of the things we need to do to raise healthy children is make sure that they have high self-esteem. And so what we try to do is we try to boost self-esteem, directly boost it. How do we do that? By telling them that they're wonderful. But this is not this is not in alignment with fundamental human psychology. That's not how we're wired. We're not wired to receive compliments and then have that turn us into truly self-actualized people. That narrative that you're wonderful, you're great, you're whatever, is a nice thing. It's a nice sentiment, but the sentiment doesn't, that narrative doesn't stick. They don't just take that on and then that's their new identity. Self-esteem, kind of like self-regulation, is something that develops organically when certain conditions are met. Self-esteem is a result. It's a byproduct, not something you can just tell someone to believe and have it stick. You can puff someone up, but that's pretty much just ego inflation, and that always deflates and usually comes with a hangover. It's telling someone they're great is like taking a pendulum and pulling it to one side and then letting it go. It's going to swing the other way. I'm not saying we should never compliment people. I'm saying that's not the source of meaningful self-esteem. Self-esteem comes, like I was saying, like self-regulation, it comes partly from being esteemed. If the people around you think highly of you, they don't have to say it. It's how they treat you. And we will internalize that. So that's part of it. But some people's opinion matters more than others. You can have someone have high self-esteem, walk into a room and have a bunch of haters, and they just kind of recognize that that's the situation and they don't take that on. That's ideal. But they have to be secure in their own self, their own sense of self, for that to occur. How do we achieve that? Well, it turns out it's not from telling someone you're great, you're secure, you're stronger. Just ignore those people. That's good advice. But the reality is, it comes from feeling cared about, which requires not just the parent feeling that care, like I was talking about before, but enacting it in certain ways. Let's just take the most simple, most fundamental way of expressing care. which is through physical touch. This goes to both a sense of self and self-regulation. If a child, if a child is dysregulated, temporarily dysregulated, crying, upset, frustrated, and a caring attachment figure, it could be a parent, it could be a grandparent, it could be an early childhood educator, just picks that child up and holds them. And the parent or the educator is calm and nurturing at the same time. What happens is that child's dysregulation and the parents or guardians or educators or caregivers regulation bump up against each other. And in that moment, one of two things kind of can happen. Either the adult, I'll just say the adult and the child, the adult can let the child's dysregulation dysregulate them, and then you have two dysregulated people. Or you can just, if you stay the course and the adult stays calm and grounded, the child eventually, their dysregulation will start to, through mirror neuronal activity, will start to dissipate, and the child will entrain, their nervous system will entrain with yours without fail. I have two kids, and I do not always have the presence of mind or the patience or the wherewithal to enact this strategy, but every time I have, it has worked 100% of the time. It's magical, even to me. It's like a miracle, because the longer my 2-year-old cries, well, 20-month-old, the longer he cries, the more I kind of wonder if it's going to happen somewhere inside me. And it's having a robust mental framework and the proper map that allows me to have the faith to stick with the process and just stay calm and patient, combined with the ability to stay calm and patient through that, to continually come back to a centered, balanced place within myself that allows this miracle to occur, where at a certain point, his upset has run its course. And as soon as it does, it's like he goes from sobbing, crying, screaming, kicking, whatever it is, to a big exhale and clunk, leans in. There's usually a few aftershocks, like an earthquake, crying again, leans in. Now, when that happens, what's going on from his perspective? He's having this big upset, this emotional upset and eruption. And then not to pat myself on the back, but in this case, I'm just using a personal experience. I am scooping him up. I'm staying with him. I'm signaling to him, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to be there with you through this as long as it takes. And I'm going to remain, to the best of my ability, I'm going to remain calm and present. And what he experiences is, at the end of his emotional dysregulation, an experience of emotional regulation. Oh, this is what it feels like to come back to center, to come back to calm, to come back to balance. And it feels good. It feels good to be at peace, to be connected to a loved one. It feels good for both of us. That's nature's way of sort of encouraging and incentivizing that behavior in me. And after experiencing it once or twice, combined with having the map and the belief in the map, it gives me even more strength, if you will, to endure an even longer or more pronounced eruption, if that is to occur. It doesn't happen often, but it still happens. Life gets situationally dysregulating for all of us. This example is one of me as the parent comforting a toddler, but it works pretty much equally as well with my 6-year-old. It's harder. It's harder for both of us. It's harder for me to grant her the space to throw a tantrum at 6 compared to my not even 2-year-old. But the general principle still applies. If she's acting out, it means she's dysregulated. And sometimes I address the behavior directly. No, that's not acceptable. It's time for you to do this. And that's, of course, completely, I don't see a way around doing that. And nor do I see a need to try to get around doing that. That's just part of parenting, giving direction, of course. But if she's not taking my direction, part of it, one of the first places to look is at whether or not she's regulated or how well regulated she is. Not self-regulated, regulated. If she is spun out, how is she going to follow my lead? How is she going to do what she's told? At LifeWorks, a tutoring company, we spend an enormous amount of time talking about, thinking about, and cultivating our ability to help teens regulate. First from the outside in and over time from the inside out. Because kids can't learn when they're dysregulated. So if we want to be effective, we have to help kids regulate. That's the first thing we have to do every single time we sit down. We have to assess how regulated or dysregulated the student is. If a student walks in and is just in a really good space, then we can just jump right into the lesson, whatever it is. We can just get down to business. But if the student comes in and is completely dysregulated, regardless of why, we have to address it. Otherwise, not only is that session going to be completely ineffective for that person, for that student, but in a small group setting, I'm not even talking about a 25-person classroom. In a 3-person group or a 5-person group, that session could be torpedoed by someone. So we have a responsibility to both that student and the other students in the room, to help bring that student from a state of dysregulation to a state of some minimal level of regulation. And if we can't do that within the context of that group, what we do is we say, you got to take that student outside and have a one-on-one conversation, not to punish them for their behavior, their quote bad behavior, but to help them get back into a semblance of regulated nervous system state. The interesting thing is, when I've done this over the years, I say, if it reaches that point where I say, I need to come with me, they say, where are we going? Into the hallway. The whole room, you can feel, gets kind of like on edge. Oh boy, what's happening? And they go, what do you want to talk about? I go, you'll see. Come with me. Come on. And it's this very serious, stern feeling moment. Scary even for everyone. It feels that way even to me. But the interesting thing is, when I get them out into the hallway and it's just the two of us, my nervous system relaxes. Because instinctively, I'm not trying to get them in trouble. I'm trying to help them calm down. I'm trying to help them regulate. So instead of going, you're really not behaving. If you continue like this, I'm going to have to send you home. I go, what's going on? Talk to me. Like, let's put all this aside. What? We're trying to have a session in there. Like, what's going on? Talk to me. I get more human with them. I wasn't expecting that to happen. I didn't even know what I was going to say the first time I did it. I just knew I had to address this issue. I brought him out into the hallway and I'm going, what am I about to say to this kid? And we sit down and I instinctively went to softer, more human, more receptive, more nurturing. Hey, what's going on, man? This isn't you. And it has, again, it hasn't needed to happen very often, but it has, in the handful of times that this has been necessary, it's worked every time. So there is a lot more to be said about this subject, but I think the simple takeaway, if there is one, is that dysregulated kids cannot learn. They cannot learn and they cannot perform well. They can't perform well on tests. They can't perform well on long-term or even medium-term assignments. They can't perform on individual math problems. And we have an epidemic of dysregulation going on. And I think a big part of it is that we don't understand human nature, human development, child psychology enough to provide proper care, proper attention, proper support for kids as they're growing up so that they can learn how to self-regulate. We can barely regulate our own emotions often. If we are walking around, if we're walking around chronically anxious, how can we teach a child to self-regulate? Their dysregulation is going to instantly throw us into our own. It's going to exacerbate our own. We're not going to be able to provide the calm base of attachment for them to entrain with. And my point is not to blame anyone. My point is to articulate the problem starkly and honestly so that we understand what's going on better. We understand the stakes involved here. We understand the importance of learning how to cultivate inner peace ourselves so not so that we feel better, although that's one of the benefits, but so that we can help kids cultivate self-regulation so that they can learn, so that they can perform on tests, so that they can do assignments. I don't blame anyone if they're struggling as a parent or as an educator. If they're struggling with chronic anxiety, that's an awful thing to have to deal with. There's a lot that's broken. There's a lot that's out of whack. If you're a parent and you are struggling with dysregulation in whatever form it takes, addiction is dysregulation. If you're dealing with dysregulation, struggling, everyone deals with dysregulation. But if you're struggling, if you're feeling incapacitated by dysregulation, it's probably because this whole cycle it's not new. You probably didn't get the very thing I'm talking about yourself. This is not the first time. This is a generational pattern, multi-generational pattern. It's going to take time to correct the ship. But we have to understand what's going on to even have a chance at that correction.
These orthodoxies, which we're proud of and rightfully so in many ways, because they've contributed to what's different about the United States and driven local innovation, but they're also now contributing to this intractable, difficult, important problem to solve, which is how do we truly prepare our kids to succeed, not just as workers, but also as human beings and as citizens of this country.
Dana, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael.